Hi, Thaisa. It's so nice to see you with Dumbarton Oaks behind you. Sight matters. And start, I know you've picked a sentence and I've picked a sentence. So I will give the floor, so to speak, the window, so to speak, to you.
Thank you. So I picked a sentence from your essay titled Defining Urban Sites, and it's about 3/4 of the way through. And you write under the heading of unbound sites, any design action for a limited site in a city is at once influenced by and has consequences for the city as site. And what it made me think about is that when we think about site and urban site, we assume that urban is a descriptor of the site. It positions the site in a particular place, context, constellation, as you note. But one could also argue that urban, in fact, describes the designer's approach and is actually defining, if I'm the designer, defining the lens through which I'm going to look at the site. And what that would mean is that I'm looking at the site through the lens of urban, which is human, culture, inscriptions of making place on a site with intention, which suggests then an urban site could be anywhere because it has everything to do with the thinker, the doer, the designer, and less to do with defining the positionality or the location or even the context of the site.
That is so interesting. You are a very close reader because what you're bringing up is something that I say at the beginning of the essay of not associating the word urban as a descriptor of a condition. And I also come back to it at the end of the essay saying this site is not in the city, but the city is in the site. And I think this is really worth more conversation because it talks to the trickiness of language, how we all get caught up with certain terminology when it comes to site. That's great to think about further. So I have to say, Thaisa, it was not easy to pick one passage from your piece, but I did land on a passage where I honed in the conclusion. And it was interesting to me because you begin by talking about reading and also writing, as Lucy Diedrich might say, the urban site, but you kind of pivot in a way that lands us in the university or the academy. And it's a sweet little switch. So it starts, deep readings of an urban site require building bridges without consensus, but with specific and distinct views, knowledge, and objectives. Finding common ground that transcends boundaries becomes a means of productively confronting multiple diverse and conflicting visions, goals, and descriptions. This is not simple work. You then kind of point to that not simple work, which could be initially thought of as site study work or site representation work, and you change the target and you suggest that it could incite a revolution that wouldn't only reshape disciplines, but might imagine reimagining the academy as a place of collective inquiry and knowledge. I was really struck by that sentence in the particular context of this ECLAS conference, how it made me wonder, how do members of university communities who are involved in landscape participate in this extremely important, I'll call revolutionary activity of reimagining the university as a place of shared or collective knowledge. And I stop and think for another reason as well, that landscape historically as a field has never been a powerhouse at universities or research institutions. So the idea that it could instigate change is a really intriguing but striking one.
You're absolutely right. Landscape is not seen as a powerhouse in the university. And yet the idea of landscape is in some way, right? If you think of all the different disciplines who have tried to engage with a landscape lens perspective, but also taking that and suggesting it could turn the university upside down in very positive ways. I think it's something I look forward to thinking about that more, because I think it's an unspoken yet real potential and imagined future.
Hi, Christina. Good to see you. Yeah. Hi. We are next door neighbors in the book, and I, well, don't think that's a coincidence. We are both trying to get our head around the complexities of the new age of mankind, the Anthropocene, in a way. And what, let's say, your observation in the book really struck me. You say the most important challenge for conceiving sites is to incorporate time. I have to look in the book again. We are living in the last 2 or 3 decades of a relatively stable 10,000 years period. This 10,000 year period allowed us to build complex data systems, cities, infrastructure, etc., etc. And well, you intimate in this quote that we sort of left that stable period. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, well, learning to ride the tiger in a way of these complexities and brings new responsibilities, new tasks, but also new uncertainties for the designing communities and landscape architecture in particular. We always boast that we are sort of mediators between the ancient mankind and nature, in a way that we are the good guys. But what do you think? Do we have to reconsider our responsibilities as landscape architects?
I do. I think I really appreciate your discussion of values and ethics, because I you know, the science only takes you so far. It tells you something about what's happening, but not what to do.
Yeah.
The question is really, how will we approach this in terms of what we do?
Absolutely. So we know, well, round and about what to do. We know how to stumble forward intelligently, but in a way, we don't know how to do it, given the well, the really complex political and environmental discussion we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the typology you deliver at the end of your essay is really helpful to see these different dichotomies in a way. That is, I stumbled via an indirect way over the same dichotomies as you did.
Mm-hmm.
So we both were rooting for the South Pole. I'm not sure if you have the dogs or the ponies, Christina, who will be there first. But that's the goal in a way.
Mm-hmm. And what was interesting to me is that with your quote about riding the tiger of complexity, from your chapter, I thought that was really a really interesting section, because you were outlining what kind of attitude we needed to have, that we needed to see it as like we're surfing this complexity, we're trying to ride something that's very dangerous. But what's our alternative? The dangerous thing has already escaped.
Absolutely.
Pandora's box is open now with climate change. And what do we do? And the last thing in Pandora's box is hope. But maybe that hope shapes practices and attitudes and strategies.
I think so, and I really hope they do. But I also think that we have to be aware for, let's say, a sort of toxic optimism that seems to be as a cloak over the complete design community, failing to see that sometimes they are rather part of the problem than part of the solution in a way. And so repositioning of the profession and having, well, like this whole ECLAS conference is stop and think. I think, yes, indeed, that's a good theme. It's an urgent theme.
Yeah, stop and think and then act differently.
Yeah. Let's say. There it is. Fantastic.
Thank you, dear.
What a trick.
Appreciate that handoff. And I look forward to more discussions and more actions.
We'll see each other in virtually in the ECLAS conference.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Lisa.
Nice to see you today. I would like to start this discussion in pointing at something I'm really interested in your essay, which is the role you attribute to drawing. And I'm very fond of these words. Representation offers a chance to establish common ground. A drawing can act as a framework to gather and register different meanings. And a question about a picture of the landscape can elicit shared reflection about what lies behind appearances. So this is out of the book. What I love about this claim is that as designers, we can draw something and then also divert from that drawing. We can detect what the picture captures and also what not. And this engagement with the drawing opens a dialogue upon gaps we perceive, and it can also lead to flesh out in a conversation with oneself or with others what so far has been lying in the shadow zone. And as you know, I'm quite interested in shadow zones as per my own research. And I also, by that interest, I was pointing further down on the same page here, a sentence where you qualify the drawing as an open document. And as such, to me, it may lead to what I call radicant design in my essay, which is ideas and perspectives for transformation instead of design as a fixed form. And I think that in the context of this ECLAS landscape conference, it also supports the idea of landscape as an open document itself, in constant flux, subject to constant conversations about transformative actions. And that is something totally different from landscape as a scenery and as a single appearance. So I'm coming back to this idea of appearances and going behind, which seems of particular interest to me too in the context of a conference entitled Stop and Think. Because to explore landscapes beyond their mere appearance, I really appreciate how you conceptualize the activity of drawing, discussing, redrawing, rediscussing as a series of stop and think moments. So eventually drawing as support to designing conversations, as you call it in the first place, to me enables something I'd like to call reflective practice be it professional or academic. And this entices changes of mindset, seeing one's life world differently, overcoming accepted appearances, and it eventually triggers change of physical grounds, which does not just mean a renewed landscape as a noun, but of the activity to landscape all along, landscape as a verb.
Well, Lisa, I too was really struck by the overlaps and connections in our writing and our drawing and our thinking. It seems to me that we're both talking about the same themes. How do we document landscapes? How do contexts exist in time as well as in space? And what should we make of the plurality of possible futures that can't be known until a site's ongoing life has been observed for some time? So I'm going to color outside the lines and quote 2 sentences from your essays instead of 1. The first sentence is, the apprehension of sight can be called sight reading, and the transformation sight editing. There can be no sight editing without previous sight reading, which means that reading becomes the foundational act in the creative process. I think that has a lot to do with the work in my essay that describes documentation as the first step toward conversation and ultimately design. And I was also struck by another sentence that seemed like you might have thought it for me. All sites are inhabited by many qualities and related claims whose originators and interests must be respected and reflected before design takes place. And to me, that seems to line up very closely with what I've described as a Rashomon effect, where many stories are simultaneously true, whether or not they're the same. I've been thinking about our essays as having a kind of conversation with each other, and here's how I'd summarize it. They're both saying that sites are fundamentally narrative, that they can only be understood over time and through dynamic processes, whether they're human or more than human. And in both essays, drawing provides a means to lay out site stories. It's a documentation tool, it's a translation tool, it's an imaginative tool, and it's a conversational tool. And if I'm reading your essay right, we also share the view, our essays share the view, that drawing is most useful when it's recursive, when it cycles among all of those capacities, like this drawing does. And if recursion means returning in thought or discourse, well, that's a process of stopping and thinking again and again. So thanks for this.
And I think that this is somehow looking beyond or behind appearances.